Crawford addressed his Austrian GP outing directly, stating via GP fans that it is great to have another opportunity to drive the AMR 26 during a race weekend, and noting that Austria is a circuit he knows well. He said it plainly and calmly with no drama attached. That statement was delivered as routine press commentary rather than a victory lap or farewell speech, reflecting the mundane reality of a reserve driver accumulating mileage under regulatory compulsion. Formula 1. COM and Grand Prix 247 treat these rotations as expected procedural news instead of breaking transfer stories because the FP1 rookie quota is a standing FIA regulation applying to every single team on the grid. The replacement framing you see in thumbnails is a viral template rather than a verified event, and multiple existing videos have already used that exact phrase to describe the same recurring situation. Numbers do not lie, contracts do not bend, rumors do both. This brings us to the critical ambiguity that defines the entire Zandvoort conversation right now. While we know Crawford will be in the car for Friday practice, absolutely no primary source confirms whether he will be taking over Fernando Alonso's seat or Lance Stroll's seat for this specific Dutch Grand Prix session. One AI-generated search summary claimed it would be Alonso's car, but that assertion could not be verified against any original reporting and should never be presented as established fact. This is where the narrative splits from certainty into speculation. We cannot bridge this gap without inventing information that does not exist in the verified record. So instead of guessing, we must acknowledge that the single most important detail about Zandvoort remains officially unresolved. The tension here is real. The answer is absent. The clickbait fills that void with fiction. What we can confirm is that Stoffel van Dorn remains embedded in the simulator program while Crawford handles the trackside rookie obligations, creating a clear functional separation between test duties and regulatory compliance runs. Both drivers are working, neither is being replaced. The distinction matters enormously when evaluating what this weekend actually signifies for Aston Martin's 2026 campaign. Let us restate the foundation before moving forward. Both Alonso and Stroll hold full-season contracts for 2026. Crawford's FP1 appearances are mandated by sporting regulations rather than performance concerns, and the Zandvoort seat assignment remains unconfirmed despite widespread assumptions. That is the verified landscape. Everything beyond it requires careful handling. Looking past the immediate Zandvoort question, the rumor mill has already shifted its attention to 2027, where an X account called Everything Formula posted that Lawrence Stroll has reportedly made Fernando Alonso a lucrative financial offer to keep him at Aston Martin. That same post, relayed via F1 Oversteer, claims Alonso remains 100% in control of his future, while Esteban Ocon is reportedly being considered for a reserve role in 2027 with hopes of securing a full-time Aston Martin seat. This is social media sourcing. Not team confirmation, not driver verification. Just digital noise amplified by repetition. The regulatory mechanism driving this entire Zandvoort discussion is the FIA's mandatory rookie FP1 quota, which requires every team to field a driver with 2 or fewer prior Grand Prix starts in at least 2 first practice sessions across the 2026 season. This is not discretionary. It is compulsory compliance. Teams cannot opt out. Aston Martin has already satisfied part of this obligation by running Jak Crawford in FP1 at Japan, Belgium, and Austria, with an Abu Dhabi outing and the post-season young driver test also locked into the schedule according to Formula 1, COM, and Roundtable.io. These appearances are bureaucratic checkboxes, not performance evaluations signaling imminent lineup changes. Felipe Drugovich previously held this reserve role before Crawford was promoted from the junior program, and that transition itself was framed as routine succession planning rather than emergency intervention. Motorsport Week confirms Van Dorn remains the simulator and test driver, meaning Aston Martin has deliberately separated its development resources between trackside rookie compliance and factory-based technical validation. Why does this structural distinction matter so much right now? Because conflating a regulatory FP1 rotation with a race seat replacement erases the actual purpose of these sessions, which is to give emerging drivers standardized exposure under controlled conditions without disrupting championship contending operations. GPF has explicitly treated Crawford's Austrian GP substitution for Stroll in FP1 as procedural news, noting he returned the car to Lance Stroll for FP2 and the remainder of that weekend without incident or commentary suggesting deeper issues. No source in the verified research describes any 2026 race seat change for either Alonso or Stroll. None. The replacement plan language circulating online is a recycled thumbnail convention, not a documented team strategy. Planet F1 and F1 Oversteer both confirm both drivers remain full-season contracted entries for 2026, and no mid-season swap has occurred at any point this year. Data anchors truth, speculation drifts, compliance explains everything. Let's reset the baseline once more. Crawford's Zandvoort FP1 appearance is a scheduled regulatory fulfillment, not a signal of Stroll's removal. Both race seats are contractually occupied through the end of 2026, and the only confirmed plan is the FIA's own rookie participation mandate. That is the irreducible core. Everything else is interpretation layered atop obligation. What makes this particularly tricky for viewers is that the same visual evidence, Crawford in the AMR 26 during a race weekend, serves two completely different narratives depending on whether you prioritize regulatory context or click-driven framing. The car looks identical. The timing looks suspicious, but the underlying cause is administrative, not competitive. Even the Austrian GP example, where Crawford temporarily took Stroll's FP1 slot, resolved within hours as Stroll resumed normal duties, demonstrating how transient and functionally limited these assignments truly are. There is no escalation pattern, no progressive takeover, just repeated, isolated compliance events spaced across the calendar to satisfy sporting regulations. If Aston Martin were genuinely preparing to replace Stroll mid-season, they would not be broadcasting it through mandatory rookie sessions governed by external rules. They would be conducting private testing, managing PR transitions, or negotiating contract exits, none of which appear anywhere in the verified research. Instead, we see exactly what the rulebook demands, a young driver getting seat time in designated windows while the primary lineup continues uninterrupted. That is the reality beneath the headline. The noise obscures it, the facts clarify it. And until a primary source contradicts this framework, the regulatory explanation remains the only one supported by evidence. Picture this for a second. You are sitting at a desk with two identical keys and one locked door, and someone tells you definitively which key opens it without ever having touched the lock or seen the mechanism inside. That is precisely the position we find ourselves in regarding the Zandvoort FP1 seat assignment, because while Jak Crawford's participation is confirmed, the specific car he will occupy remains entirely unverified despite confident assertions circulating online. One AI-generated search summary stated as fact that Crawford would be taking Fernando Alonso's AMR 26 for the Dutch Grand Prix first practice session, but exhaustive cross-referencing against every primary article in the research window failed to produce a single original source supporting that claim. This is not a minor discrepancy. It is a fundamental verification failure that transforms what should be straightforward reporting into guesswork dressed up as certainty. The danger here is subtle but significant. When algorithmic summaries present unconfirmed details with the same authoritative tone as verified facts, they create false confidence in information that has no evidentiary foundation whatsoever. We know Crawford will drive. We do not know whose seat he takes. Those are two separate pieces of knowledge, and merging them without proof manufactures a narrative that does not exist in the documented record. GP F1's Formula 1, Com, Grand Prix 247, Roundtable. I/O, Motorsport Week, Planet F1, and F1 Oversteer all confirm Crawford's FP1 appearances across multiple 2026 weekends, yet none specify the Zandvoort seat allocation as Alonso's versus Stroll's. Silence from primary sources is not confirmation, it is absence. And treating absence as evidence is how misinformation takes root in motorsport coverage. Facts require documentation, assumptions require restraint, verification requires both. So where does that leave us heading into the Dutch Grand Prix weekend? We have a confirmed driver in an unconfirmed car, operating under a mandatory regulatory framework that treats both race seats as functionally interchangeable for compliance purposes. The team has not announced the assignment. No journalist has reported it from an on-record source. The AI summary stands alone, unsupported, and unverifiable, which means presenting it as established truth would violate basic standards of accurate F1 journalism. What we can say with absolute certainty is that whichever seat Crawford occupies, it will be returned to its contracted driver before FP2 begins, just as happened in Austria when Stroll resumed his normal schedule after the rookie session concluded. The temporary nature of these assignments is baked into their regulatory purpose. They are borrowing moments, not permanent transfers. Yet the unverified Alonso-specific claim persists in digital spaces precisely because it fits a pre-existing narrative template about veteran drivers being phased out, even though no evidence supports that interpretation for 2026. This is where audience retention gets tested. Viewers want definitive answers. The research provides only bounded certainty. Resisting the urge to fill that gap with speculation is what separates reliable coverage from content farming. The Zandvoort seat question will eventually be answered when the FIA publishes the official entry list, or when Aston Martin confirms the rotation publicly, but until that moment arrives, the honest position is acknowledged uncertainty rather than fabricated precision. Go back to that opening line about Crawford addressing his Austrian GP outing directly with no drama attached, because his own words provide the most reliable lens for understanding what these sessions actually represent from inside the cockpit. He stated via GP fans that it is great to have another opportunity to drive the AMR 26 during a race weekend, and noted that Austria is a circuit he knows well, framing the entire experience as developmental repetition rather than competitive audition. That phrasing matters enormously. Opportunity, drive, know well. These are the vocabulary choices of a reserve driver accumulating reference laps, not a replacement candidate making a final case for promotion. When the person actually in the car describes the session as routine familiarity building, it becomes increasingly difficult to sustain external narratives about secret replacement plans or hidden performance crises. His tone was measured and professional throughout the quoted statement, reflecting someone executing a predefined role within a larger organizational structure rather than seizing an unexpected opening. This aligns perfectly with how GP fans and Formula One. Com covered the Austrian FP1 rotation as expected procedural news, reinforcing that the driver's own assessment matches the media's factual reporting. Why should we trust Crawford's characterization over viral speculation? Because he is the only person who has physically occupied that seat under current 2026 conditions and can speak to its actual purpose from direct experience. The AMR26 is not a mystery to him. It is a known quantity he has driven across multiple weekends at Japan, Belgium, and Austria, each time returning detailed feedback to engineers before handing the car back to the primary lineup. That continuity of development work is exactly what reserve roles exist to support, and his language reflects that functional reality without embellishment or agenda. No source attributes any frustration, urgency, or competitive pressure to his FP1 appearances. There is no subtext suggesting he believes himself to be next in line for a full-time seat based on these sessions alone. Instead, he consistently frames them as valuable learning opportunities within a structured program designed to maintain readiness without disrupting championship operations. This is where the stakes escalate beyond simple fact-checking. Here's why this actually matters. If audiences internalize Crawford's routine FP1 rotations as evidence of imminent lineup changes, they fundamentally misunderstand how modern F1 teams manage regulatory compliance alongside long-term driver development, which distorts their ability to evaluate genuine transfer news when it eventually emerges. The consequence is not just misinformation about one team's weekend plans. It is erosion of trust in accurate motorsport journalism itself, as viewers conditioned to expect dramatic revelations from mundane compliance events become skeptical when real stories lack sensational framing. Crawford's calm professionalism serves as an antidote to that cycle. His words anchor interpretation in observable reality rather than algorithmic amplification,